Welcome to the top millennial mental health issues, adult ADHD. In the United States, adult ADHD has risen from 6.1% to 10.2% in just the last 2 decades. That's a 67% increase, costing the U.S. over $122 billion each year due to underemployment, lost productivity, and the cost of treatment. And that number is most likely an underestimate because according to the NIH, fewer than 20% of adults with ADHD are accurately diagnosed or treated. I myself wasn't diagnosed until I was in my early 30s. And just looking back, I knew it was obvious, but here's the kicker. Just 6 questions confirmed what I had always suspected. I have ADD. By the way, I'm Scott Treese, a therapist and ADHD career coach, and welcome to my series on the rising issues for millennial mental health. And today, we're diving into adult ADHD. So what is it, how to recognize it, and what's causing it? And so before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, or drop a comment about your own ADHD diagnosis journey. Now, let's get into it. So what is ADHD really? One word, regulatory issue. And yep, I'm hyphenating that into a single word because ADHD isn't just about inattention or hyperactivity. It's the challenge of self-regulation across the board. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, but I'm going to use ADD and ADHD interchangeably. And at its core, ADHD is about regulation. It's just as difficult to pay attention to something as it is to unpay attention to something. Just like how gas and brake regulates a car of movement, ADHD's regulatory struggles makes it hard to refrain from doing something. Think about like impulse control, as it is to start doing something. Think about task initiation. Have you ever played this game? Whatever you do, don't press the big red button. Seriously, don't press it. Yeah, if you have ADHD, then you probably know exactly what it feels like. ADHD isn't just about getting distracted. It's not about just being able to stop yourself from reacting to distractions. It's like having this faulty brake system in your brain. You tell yourself, I'll just check this one text. And then 5 minutes later, you're deep in a Wikipedia hole about how jellyfish don't age or something. Or and you stare at an important work task for hours, knowing it needs to get done, but you just can't start, and your brain refuses to switch into go mode. And then there's procrastination, right? Not just because you're lazy, but because the task feels overwhelming. Your brain says, that's a future me problem, and the future you is really going to hate this. So rather than diving into dense DSM criteria, let's break down the 6 statistically validated questions from the ASRS, which is a widely used screening tool developed by the World Health Organization, WHO, to identify symptoms of attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Let's break down the 6 core questions. First up is, how often do you have trouble wrapping up the final details of a project once the challenging parts have been done? Right? You might start organizing your closet, pull everything out, and enjoy sorting through clothes. But once the exciting part is over, you leave piles of clothes sitting on the floor for days or weeks. Perhaps finishing up feels unbearable. Question 2, how often do you have difficulty getting things in order when you have to do a task that requires organization? Right? Many adults with ADD know what needs to get done, but struggle to structure the process in a way that actually makes sense. Right? For example, you need to pack for a trip, but instead of making a simple checklist, you get overwhelmed by all the decisions, right? What clothes, what toiletries. So you procrastinate until the last minute and just end up throwing random items into a suitcase, forgetting those key essentials. Question 3, how often do you have problems remembering appointments or obligations? Because people with ADHD struggle with working memory, which makes remembering commitments challenging, even important ones. Right? We often forget tasks, appointments, or deadlines unless we're externally reminded. For example, if we set a doctor's appointment on our phone, but we completely forget until the doctor calls us, wondering where you are. Question 4. When you have a task that requires a lot of thought, how often do you avoid or delay getting started? Basically, ADD paralysis, a tendency to put off complex tasks because we just feel overwhelmed, leading to this procrastination and avoidance. Question 5. How often do you fidget or squirm with your hands or feet when you have to sit down for a long time? This question measures hyperactivity and restlessness, which often manifests as physical movement like tapping or bouncing a leg or playing with objects. Even if hyperactivity is not necessarily present in childhood, many adults might experience this inner sense of restlessness. For example, if we're in a long meeting while others seem to be sitting still just fine, you might find yourself bouncing your leg, clicking your pen, or playing with your phone case just to stay focused. Question 6. How often do you feel overly active and compelled to do things like you are driven by a motor? Many adults with ADHD describe this feeling like our brain never shuts off, right? This can lead to impulsive decision making, excessive talking, or constantly starting new activities without ever finishing our previous ones. Right? If we suddenly get an idea for a new hobby, like learning the guitar, where we might buy all the equipment that day, practice intensely for a few days, and then we lose interest, only for another new obsession to eventually take over. Right? These 6 questions highlight key ADHD struggles: inattention, executive dysfunction, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Okay, so we know that over the last 16 years, ADHD's diagnosis have skyrocketed. But why? Is ADHD truly on the rise, or are we just better at recognizing it? Some argue that we just slap on an ADHD label on every hyperactive kid. Or we just use ADD as a crutch, or maybe as an excuse as why we failed a semester, after we didn't go to class or do our work. While others insist it's actually massively underdiagnosed, especially in adults who grew up without ever realizing they had it. So where's the truth? Let's start with the science behind ADHD. We know that ADD is a neurodevelopmental condition, meaning that certain areas of the brain, especially in the prefrontal cortex, show structural and functional differences. That's why people use this term called neurodivergent. For example, the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus may actually be smaller, or the visual attention network may actually be overactive, leading to hyperfocus or distractibility. But here's the thing. ADHD cannot currently be diagnosed with a brain scan. Maybe one day, but not yet. And I think this is where the neurodivergent conversation goes just too far. Some ADHD advocates, and even including some of those in the medical field, promote ADHD as just a difference and not a disorder. And while it's true that the ADHD brains work differently, calling it only a difference actually, I think, ignores 2 key realities. First is that ADHD causes real dysfunction, right? It's not just a quirky personality trait. It's a legitimate struggle with organization and follow through and memory and impulse control. And wouldn't it be great if your executive functioning skills just worked, right? If you actually did what you wanted to do and follow through, it'd be awesome. The second key reality is that it's not just nature, it's also nurture. If ADHD were only about brain structure, then environment, culture, or personal choices, they wouldn't matter. But they do. And if we ignore that, then we strip away our ability to improve and adapt. And that, my friends, would leave us helpless, which we are not. Which leads me to these questions. Is ADHD a product of modern life? If both genetics and environments influence ADHD, then it makes sense to ask, is our modern world making ADHD worse? Consider this. We've known that lead exposure alters brain function and is linked to ADHD. But recent studies have also shown that the Western diets, high in ultra-processed foods, increase ADHD risk by 92%. And artificial food coloring has a 51% increased risk. But honestly, I'm most curious about our own behavior regarding what's been changing. And I can't help but wonder, Are we causing ADHD? For example, does screen time cause or turn on ADD? I mean, the short answer is we don't know, but we do know it makes ADHD worse, 100%. This constant stimulation trains the brains to crave more, making focus feel impossible. Every scroll, every like is a mini dopamine hit where your brain gets hooked on instant gratification. And then there's sleep. Doom scrolling, binge watching sabotages our brain function, wreaking havoc on focus and impulse control. And stress? ADHD's worst enemy. Schoolwork, finances, it all compounds and messes with our brain's development. It's not just about genetics. It's about epigenetics. Our environment literally influences how our genes express themselves. More distractions, more toxins, more stress. It's no surprise that ADHD is skyrocketing. So no, screens and junk food don't cause ADD, but they do turn the dial up to 100. So we know ADHD is influenced by both biology and our environment, which means that if you want to manage ADHD effectively, you need to take control of both. So here are 3 powerful strategies that can change the game for you. First is we need to talk about how to manage your environment by starting with your surroundings, because your environment shapes your brain. If your world is full of distractions and toxins and overstimulation, guess what? Your ADHD symptoms will get worse. So here's what you can do. First, clean up your diet, right? This Western diet, the ultra-processed foods, refined sugars, and artificial additives, they make ADHD worse. And studies show, as we saw, a 92% increased risk with a poor diet. So also you need to minimize your toxic exposure. Things like heavy metals, pesticides, air pollution can literally alter your brain function. And then try to regulate your dopamine overload. The constant stream of intense content, TikTok, gaming, YouTube, infinite scrolling hijacks your brains and your reward systems, making it harder to focus. So set boundaries around your screen time, especially before bed. And then we also need to start taking care of our brain and body, right? You can't out-hack ADHD if your brain and body aren't taken care of. So here's how to level up your mental performance. First, prioritize sleep. And I know this might seem obvious, but ADHD and sleep issues go hand in hand. And if you're running on 4 hours of sleep, especially chronically, your focus, your memory, your mood, your impulse control all go out the window. So set a bedtime with no screens before sleep. And I actually encourage you to prioritize when you get up, the same time at least 6 days out of the week. I think about that as calling that feet on your floor. Also, move your body. Exercise is a cheap cheat code for ADHD. It increases dopamine, improves focus, stabilizes your mood. You don't need to run a marathon, just move. And I also want to encourage you to practice mindfulness. Look, I get it. Meditation is weird and it sounds boring, but even 5 minutes a day can improve impulse control, focus, and emotional regulation. And one of my favorite parts about mindfulness is it actually shows an increase in development of the prefrontal cortex. And then our third tip is where you need to master a productivity system. And this is where most people, I think, fail because ADHD brains struggle with time blindness and task management and follow through. And that's why you need to use a system. So you can use external tools where you stop relying on memory because it's not just your friend. So use planner apps, reminders, your phone calendar, literally whatever helps you offload the mental clutter. And also work in focus sprints or marathons. For some with ADHD, long work sessions don't work. So try different sessions that might be 25 minutes on with a 5-minute break. Or I personally use deep work sessions where I'll actually be working on something for 3 to 4 hours at a time. Or use a body double where you actually have someone just sitting there with you while you're doing this, if it's going to help you stay focused and engaged. Follow a proven system. If you don't have a system, you'll always feel behind. That's why I put together my ultimate productivity protocol. It's designed specifically for ADHD brains to help you manage time, tasks, and energy. And at the end of the day, ADHD isn't just about willpower. It's about designing your life in a way that supports your brain. So here are my final thoughts. ADHD is everywhere. It's a meme, it's a buzzword, it's a trend, but it's also very real. And if you see yourself in these struggles, and there are ways to work with your ADHD instead of constantly fighting against it, I'd love for you to drop a comment below about your ADHD journey. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more mental health insights. I appreciate your time, your eyeballs, and your energy. See you next time.